Hi, my name is Stéphanie Chénier. I'm the Communications Manager here at Accessibility Standards Canada. Today I'm here with Philip Ruscala, the Chief Executive Officer of our organization. So, sir, if you could say a couple of words about yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Steph. So, Philip Ruscala, I'm the Chief Executive Officer, as Stephanie just mentioned. I have been in the organization since its inception, about 4.5 years ago, and I come from a long background of standards and codes development and research, so almost 35 years.
35 years. And today we're here to talk about Accessibility Standards Canada and the work that we do as an organization. So let's start with the first question. So, sir, can you briefly tell us what Accessibility Standards Canada does, what it is, and how our work helps to build a barrier-free Canada?
Absolutely. So, as the name implies, Accessibility Standards Canada, we're a standards development organization, but we're a unique standards development organization. So there's lots of organizations in the country and in the world that develop standards. What makes us very unique is that we develop standards specifically to remove barriers to accessibility. That's our primary mission at Accessibility Standards Canada. But we also do a number of other things that are very unique. We also fund research. We fund through our grants and contribution program. That research helps to kind of inform the decisions that our committees make when we're developing our standards. It also helps inform our board of directors when they're setting priorities, and may even help form some policy for the government going forward.
For anyone who may not know out there or be aware of what a standard is, could you briefly explain to us what it is?
So I always like to give the example of a standard being it's like a recipe. So if you want to bake a cake, you need a recipe that tells you step by step how to do something. So you come out with a perfect cake at the end. So what we do is we develop recipes, whether it's for buildings, whether it's for employment, whether it's for communications. We basically spell out the recipe for the best practice to do things. But we do that with the community in mind. So we're developing standards that will give us best-in-class solutions.
With the people who know best what their needs are.
Exactly.
And talking about standards, could you provide a couple of examples for us of standards developed?
Yeah, so we've been around, like I said, for 4.5 years, so fairly new, but we're well established now. We have about 14 standards that are either been developed or under development. So I'll touch on a few of them. Some of the key standards, ICT, Information Communication Technology. That standard has been out for public review. And it's going through the process into the next steps of hopefully introducing that into legislation. We have standard on employment. We have standards on the built environment. When I talk about built environment, I'm talking about buildings. Any building that you walk into, whether it's a house, an office tower, a shopping mall, we've developed standards in those areas. We've also started developing standards in plain language. What makes us really unique compared to other standards organizations is we work on the principle of equity and inclusiveness. So when we develop our standards, unlike other standards or organizations and other code standards in the world, they work on a principle of minimum acceptable. So they grab a percentage of population, usually about 80 percentile, and they design around that 80 percentile. What makes us very unique is that we take that entire group of citizens and we say we'd like to design for about 95 to 98% of that population base. So when we design for an all-inclusive society, we end up creating standards that are a little more high level in the sense that they will apply to more people.
We're talking about standards, inclusion, making sure that they apply to the majority of the people, but we're not the only standards development organization out there. So how can we ensure that organizations, other standards development organization kind of follow our lead or get inspired by what we do? So
we can't force other organizations to do things, but we can show them good practice and we can show them results of good practice. So one thing that we are doing, when we started in our organization, we set up our very own policies. We wanted to make sure that if we were developing standards for the community of persons with disabilities, they were included in the process. So we created our policies so that our committees that develop these standards were primarily made up of persons with disabilities or lived experience. We make sure we report to our board of directors, and our board of directors is made up of a large percentage of persons with disabilities. And we've instilled a lot of these features into our practice and into our policies. We don't start a committee unless we have that balance on our committees. So in doing so, we're sharing this information with other standards organizations. And a lot of organizations, both at the international level and at the national level, are coming to us and saying, how did you get 50% women on your committee? how did you get this large representation of persons with disabilities on your committee? How did you get that intersectional lens on your committees? And we're showing them how we do it. And it's really not very difficult. You put your mind to it and you set it as a goal, you can do it. So organizations are following our lead. They're asking for our policies. They're following what we're doing in our policies. But in addition to that, we're also working with some of those standards organizations, especially some of the Canadian standard organizations. We sit on strategic boards with them. So we share this information amongst, about 6 or 7 other standards organizations within Canada. And they're starting to see the difference, and they're starting to implement some of these changes.
What about the community? What are you hearing from the community about the work that we do?
Yeah, so, as could be expected, when we first started on, the community looked to us and said, oh boy, just another standards organization. We've had standards for 100 years and we haven't received, or we haven't gotten to the point that we need to be as far as accessibility and removing of barriers. So when we go out and we talk to communities, and there's been hundreds of community groups that we've spoken to, as well as other government department agencies and anybody regulated under the federal government. We've spoken to many of them, and what we're hearing from them is that if you really want to make a difference, you have to include them in the process. So we include them in the process while we're developing our standards. We include them in the process when we're consulting. We include them in the process up front to find out what their needs are. We include them in the process when we're funding research, so that they actually carry out some of that research and that information that feeds into our work. So that's the first part is collaboration and involvement in the process. So we do that very, very well, and we're hearing very positive things on that. But secondly, we also wanted to hear from them and ask them, what works for you? Like, how can we don't want to just create a standard and throw it at you and say, here, use this standard, and cross our fingers that it works. So we work with them and we say, okay, what do you need to make the use of the standard very easy? What will make it easier for you to understand the standard, to adopt the standard, to use parts of the standard, to share amongst your community? And so what we're hearing is that they need education. They need tools to help them understand the standard, whether that's creating the standard in a plain language, whether it's changing the standard in a format so they can take it in pieces and apply portions of it in pieces. But there's a number of little steps that we're taking that are very unique, but they're based on the input that we're getting from the community.
We've talked a little bit about the standards development process here at ASC. So can you tell us a little bit more about how it differs from the process that other standards development organizations follow? And can you walk us through a little bit of that process from start to finish?
Absolutely. So our process is very unique. So as I indicated, we develop standards for the community of persons with disabilities. And we felt early on in the process that in order to develop a standard for the community of persons with disabilities, we had to include them in the process. So our policies dictate that upwards of a minimum 35% of persons with disabilities are on our committees. But we've exceeded that. We're about 58% persons with disabilities or with lived experience on our committees. But we don't just put them on our committees. These are experts in their fields. So they represent the communities. They have the expertise for the solutions that we're looking for. But what makes us very unique is that we provide all the accommodation needs for those members on our committees. So by providing the accommodations and making it very inclusive and very open, we get a lot of membership. We get a lot of people applying to sit on our committees, which is very unique. In addition to that, we also have a diversity amongst our committees. So we want to make sure we have gender balance, we have representation from across the country, we have different types of groups with disabilities represented on our committees. So I think that in itself makes us very, very unique. We give the time necessary for the committees to do their work. So when we go for consultation with their standards, when they're ready for consultation by the public, we give them more time to comment because we recognize that some members of the community need more time to actually respond and to provide the feedback. We provide the material in a manner that's accessible to a vast majority of Canadians so they can provide comments, and we're not excluding people from the process of providing input.
And can you say that all of this is showing results?
Yes, I can say for sure this is definitely showing results. What I've noticed, again, I've indicated I've worked in the standards and codes world for several decades. The amount of input that we're getting from the public is probably 5 or 6 times that I've seen in the past in other standards organizations. So there's a lot of interest in what we're doing.
How does our organization, how do we support research? How do we share information about that research? What is unique about that process as well?
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about how we select the research and then what's unique about the research. So we have a board of directors made up of primarily persons with disabilities, and that board of directors will then select what the priority areas will be for the next series of research grants that we give out for research. So when they've selected areas, whether it's employment, built environment, communication, plain language, whatever the subject is, they'll select some areas. We will go out and put a call out to the public, and we'll say, here's a call. We're looking for ideas and proposals in the area of, let's take one as an example, heritage buildings, accessibility for heritage buildings. So we will put out a call, and we have a grants and contribution program within our department, and we will fund organizations as long as they meet specific criteria. The biggest criteria being that the people that are asking for the funding are members of the community of persons with disabilities or other associations or linked to associations, or they work with those communities in the research. So they will put in proposals, we'll look at those proposals, and then that research, that research can span anywhere from 1 year to 3 years, depending on the complexity of the research. But when that research is finished, what makes us very unique is that we make that available to everybody for free. So that's really key. When we develop our standards, they're put on our Center of Expertise, which is on our website. Everybody has access to those standards, and they're completely free. When the research is completed, that's also links to that research is also put on our website, and it's available to anybody to use, whether it's governments, whether it's private sector, whether it's the community themselves.
We're talking about accessibility research, but what's the ultimate goal with supporting that research and funding that research?
Yeah.
What do the organizations that we fund actually do?
Yeah, so depending on the type of research, the ultimate goal is that research will help remove barriers to accessibility. So whether it's through our standards that we develop, whether it's through regulations that governments may put in place, or whether it's actually just helping that community solve a problem that will help them kind of aid their community or their community base.
And making that research then available for free to anyone in Canada will help spread that information and make sure that maybe other organizations can follow the lead?
Absolutely. I mean, what we hope is that our research is available not only to governments but other standards organizations, because they can learn from that research and put that into the standards that they're developing, whether they're accessibility standards or not. There's always an element of accessibility in every standard. So they can use that research to help inform some of their decisions as well.
So we've talked about research standards, but ultimately, at the end of the day, there's a lot of work being done. But what would be the main message that you would want to give to Canadians and other development organizations?
Sure. So seriously, I don't believe that developing the standards is the difficult part. We have experts, we have very committed staff, we have very committed board of directors and very committed technical members on our committees. So we develop very good standards, and I'm very proud of the standards we develop. I think the key here is the change in mindset. The community, politicians, users, the public, they all have to understand that in order to make the change, you have to change your mindset. You have to always think of everybody when you're creating policy or when you're creating any kind of service or providing a service to the public. If you think of the entire group, you can accommodate the entire group. So it's really mindset. The solutions are there. You have to incorporate the solutions, but people have to know that they're there. They have to willingly want to do this.
It's a cultural transformation. That's what we're moving towards, and that's what we're trying to influence.
Absolutely. We're trying to change 100 years of history, and we've been at it for 4 years, and we're making good progress, but it's a slow process, but it is moving in the right direction.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Riscala, for your time.
My pleasure. Thanks, Steph.
Thank you.